There's a lot of interpretations of what the town of Silent Hill is. Also, spoilers. Maybe not immediately, but they're coming. Run, they're in your house! I've seen it described as an entity that provides punishment made of your nightmares to fit your crimes, a sort of paranormal scale of justice. I've heard it described as purgatory. In the original Silent Hill 2, there was definite nods to this, like the fact that most of the bodies in Silent Hill were the same model that they used for James. Or perhaps it is only dog. But the interpretation that makes the most sense to me is that Silent Hill itself is just a town. But if you're a murderer, although for Angela I honestly hesitate to call what she did murder, this place gives you a sort of platform to work through or succumb to that guilt. It doesn't seem to be sentient or purposeful, more akin to a natural phenomena like a tornado or even gravity. Kierkegaard, a philosopher and fiercely religious man, believed that the inability to forgive oneself was rooted in false pride and vanity. He thought that this despair from unresolved guilt could make a person lose their humanity, make them afraid to exist, thinking themselves unworthy or incapable of good, which can poise a person to participate in even worse behavior. Poise a person to participate. I really should have rewritten that. He was big on the idea of forgiveness, both self and divine, and a softening of the idea of punishment. His father was deeply pious. However, because he began his family by getting his maid pregnant shortly after the death of his first wife, and apparently cursed God once, he was also deeply guilty. Now, since Kierkegaard was deeply religious, a lot of people see how he describes this as sort of like, you must be absolved by a priest and be forgiven for your sins, or something along those lines. But Kierkegaard was a complex person, and when you dig into his works, it seems that he equates self-forgiveness with divine forgiveness rather than considering them two separate things. And it seems, in a similar way, you don't seek Silent Hill's forgiveness when you enter the other world. You seek your own. We've romanticized suffering a lot in the modern day. This is pervasive in media of all kinds. Studies have shown that people listen to sad music or watch sad movies as cathartic release, helping them to process their own internal trauma through relation to the characters or musicians. It helps them feel less alone. And I can completely understand this methodology, but there's a fine line between processing and wallowing. And there's a particular body of work that I jokingly call sad porn because it's basically just ultra sad media, be it music or movies or whatever, that is really just sad to be sad, and there's not like a strong lesson or much that you can really impart from consuming it. Horror movies have become kind of notorious for this sort of shit, the whole everybody dies, people are terrible, the end kind of movies that we all know. Oh my god, the monster is a metaphor for grief? How groundbreaking! Also, a lot of the post-apocalypse movies, the message that they're trying to impart is people bad when disaster, which is historically not even accurate and also just really not a message as much as it is a common cynical opinion. And Spotify, I'm going to rant for a second about this because I'm about to ditch that platform for this reason and others. My wife and I have a running gag about how long it takes Spotify on any playlist, be it upbeat workout or please don't make me sad, I'm begging you, to play depressing shit. And usually when we time it, it's about 5 to 10 minutes. It's especially bad considering, aside from the depressing shit, another 30 to 40% of songs on the platform are people bragging about shit that you don't have and will, let's be honest, likely not get. I don't know what the fuck that's about, but it seems like the platform itself is conspiring to make you feel shitty. And it might be. See, here's something that really fucking sucks to hear. Feeling good about yourself is bad for consumerism. You know what would happen if every man, woman, and child felt confident in their own skin today? Makeup sales would plummet. 50% of people with a standing gym membership would cancel. Obviously, there are reasons to work out outside of feeling shitty about yourself, but a lot of people aren't working out for those reasons. Most supplement companies would go out of business because their "look better right fucking now, you fat piece of shit" marketing would no longer work. Plastic surgeons would be destitute instead of Porsche-driving succubi. Now, obviously, some content in this wheelhouse is like this because it's representing the feelings of the time. There's a lot of sadness and injustice in the world, and artistic representations tend to reflect the times they come from. So I'm not saying that everything that makes you feel flawed or insecure is a conspiracy. The internet itself is sort of algorithmically repeating the sentiment of society's most extreme viewpoints, because those wildly unbalanced viewpoints also attract the most attention. So there's that to contend with as well. And that also isn't necessarily malicious, just a byproduct of how algorithms try to feed us content that we pay attention to. And because human beings are inherently pattern-seeking and therefore problem-focused animals, the result is stuff that makes us feel bad tends to take a bit of precedence over what makes us feel good, just due to our natural cognitive patterns. However, the best salesmen are psychoanalysts at their core, and the powers that be selling shit are acutely aware of how your insecurities play into the buying process, as well as the consumption cycle as a whole. Impulse buying and emotional buying are essentially the same thing. The idea of retail therapy was likely considered a joke when that phrase was coined, but it has merit. I buy more shit when I'm sad. Sometimes I just scroll on Amazon when I'm not feeling good about things. Maybe this stupid fucking cup will bring me joy. They know this. I once took a course on writing sales funnels, and using emotion and selling a story that the buyer could relate to was the basis of the entire course. And you know what? It worked like a fucking charm. Corporations know that you make impulsive financial decisions when you're emotionally compromised. Do you think that they're above manipulating the social sphere to make you emotionally compromised more often? I doubt it. Now, what the fuck does that last 5 minutes have to do with Silent Hill 2? So, Silent Hill 2 is about holding on to guilt, holding on to what makes you feel bad about yourself, holding on to ideas about yourself that lead you to believe that you should be better than what you are. As Kierkegaard posited, the root of being unable to forgive yourself is thinking yourself better than your mistakes. When Mary is describing James to Laura in her letter, she describes him as surly. This is actually a pretty accurate description. Despite being an absolutely broken person at the time of his entrance to Silent Hill, James does give the impression that he thinks he's above this in several instances. Like when he sees Eddie with the corpse in front of him and starts talking about how you shouldn't just kill people. Now, Eddie is severely insecure, to the point that he's reached this paranoid level of thinking everyone is making fun of him. But he says this to James when James tells him that he needs help.
Don't get all holy on me, James. This town called you too.
And he mentions that James talks down to him. And you know what? He kinda does. Half of it is Eddie reaching. But James is a little arrogant about it. He clearly believes himself to be intelligent, to be maybe not better than, but more logical than some of the other residents. That view, I think, is a big part of why James's journey in the fog is so long. He was in denial about what he did. Because the kind of person he thought himself to be wouldn't do that. And being unable to forgive oneself in many cases can be traced back to denial by either pretending it never happened or lying to yourself saying that you don't believe what you did was wrong. Pride can be just as detrimental to forgiving oneself as poor self-opinion. And you know what? Oftentimes they run hand in hand. James seemed to think himself better than Eddie, but in most endings of the game they aren't far apart at all. And ironically, in every version, James has killed more people than Eddie. Pride often mirrors insecurity, indicates denial. If you think of the idea of being secure as a circle, and this one side of the circle as being content but not egotistical, accepting of your flaws and strengths, and then at the opposite end, Both thinking that you are the greatest ever, incapable of mistakes, and thinking you are the biggest piece of shit in the world that can't do anything right are right next to each other. I've actually experienced this firsthand. When I was in school, I was a GT kid who got told he was a fucking genius and that I had potential to do anything in the world, yada yada, my entire young life. And this led me to being an arrogant, insufferable know-it-all. Things don't ever completely change, I suppose. However, when I'd meet resistance, I'd just collapse. As soon as that worldview of being the shit was disrupted, bam, right to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. But emotional extremes of any kind aren't far apart from each other. They're all at the other end of balance. Now, corporations may be preying on our insecurities and imbalances for sales and exploiting our tendency toward guilt. But that's a side effect, not the root of the problem. That's someone taking advantage of the problem. It makes things a lot harder in the modern day. A lack of emotional balance can make it easier to fall victim to guilt, to consider yourself worthless or beyond saving. But again, that's not really the root of it. One of the hardest things I've had to work out of my head is the core belief that every time something bad happened to me, I deserved it. I deserved to suffer. And what would that mean, that you believe that you deserve suffering? It means that you believe you're guilty. I grew up in the South, meaning that I was exposed to religious dogma like it was scientific literature from a very young age. Now, I'm not religious, but I do believe in God, air quotes, but not the one that's described in religious texts. My spiritual views are pretty dense. If you want to hear more about that, I'd suggest the Alan Wake 2 video. I talk about it way more there than I'm going to here. But the main concept that always alienated me from Christianity in particular was the idea of original sin. The idea that just by being born, you're tainted in some way, and only devotion to someone's particular brand of God could scrub out the stain. Original sin has lost prevalence in modern versions of Christianity, but this thought, this idea of innate evilness present in humanity is still pervasive all the way from, well, biblical times. And it isn't entirely unjustified. People do bad shit. Sociopaths and psychopaths exist at a somewhat startling prevalence, and studies like the Stanford prison experiment shed light on human tendency. Just kidding. That was bullshit too. Apparently, this study was rife with people play acting and role playing to provide data for the observers to look at, and there were clear cues as to what the researchers were looking for. It's a completely valueless study that cynics have been using to justify shitty outlooks since it was published. Which just goes to show we don't really have as strong of a grasp on base human tendency as we think we do. Again, the problem-seeking behavior of the human brain is playing tricks on us. We assume the worst, and cynical viewpoints are being reinforced by our base human tendency to point out problems. People do incredibly bad things. People also do incredibly kind things. Instead of trying to say people are inherently good or people are inherently evil, I've got a better way to go about this. People try, but they fuck up. Disregarding antisocial personality disorders, which make up a pretty small percentage of the population and add way more nuance than I'm prepared to explore in this video. I think that succinctly ties up what we're dealing with in Silent Hill, and in most terrible things that people do. Now, fucking up kind of makes it sound like I'm describing someone who shit on their shirt tail rather than murdered their wife, but there was a lot that went into James's decision. And in most endings of this game, it destroys him. If it had been entirely selfish, if it had been as simple as he wanted his sick wife to hurry up and die so he could bang strippers, he'd be banging strippers instead of actively shying away from women who make advances on him. He'd watched a woman that he loved enough to descend into hell for the possibility that she may be alive slowly fall apart as her body failed. He watched her change from the pain, turned into something unkind and bitter, as most anyone would when racked with agony that can't be stopped with the strongest medicine. My dog died a few days ago from cancer. He was an old man. He had a really good life. It seems we understand when it's time to let go a lot better with our pets than we do with people. He seemed reasonably okay outside of the tumor until one day he just couldn't stand up. And once that happened and he couldn't run and play or be a dog, we helped him cross over so his essence could go where it was needed. It hurt, and I'm sure that there was something that we could have done to limp him along for a few more months or even a year. But that seems cruel and unusual to me. We value human life very strongly when it comes to those we love. We want to hold the pieces together, even when they're falling apart, because we can't bear the thought of losing them completely. We value the lives of those we love perhaps too strongly in comparison with the quality of that life. When a person who will not survive the disease that is inundating their body with pain is begging for death, is it crueler to kill them or to watch? Kierkegaard also posited that guilt was never fully isolated, that it was a representation of our failings interpersonally. In a way, we're seeking justice for those we've wronged, seeking it through punishing ourselves. This is why everything in Silent Hill is representative of what James feels guilt for. Sex stuff. Mary didn't die 3 years ago. She's actually in the back seat of James's car when you get to Silent Hill. That's why his hands are shaking when he looks into the mirror. His mind has fractured because he can't stomach what he did, so he fabricated the letter to shield himself. He couldn't have killed her. She's in Silent Hill. But he did, because he pitied her, hated her, loved her, and couldn't watch anymore. Was it a good decision? No, it's a fuck up, but terrible ongoing circumstances make people fuck up. Watching your partner in life slowly be eaten away to a husk of themselves would make anyone fucked up. Maybe you wouldn't do this. Maybe you'd be a good little soldier and watch to the end. But it would have its consequences all the same. The Mary that James knew and loved died 3 years ago. And she'd have likely told you similar. James tries. There's a lot that takes place to indicate that he, while maybe a bit surly, is a decent person that tries to help everyone else stuck here with him, even though he's busy fucking wailing on leg monsters hiding in all corners of his subconscious and running away from Dom Daddy Sex Man. It's crazy to me how many people think In Water is like a good ending, and the common sentiment is that James is a murderer, so he deserved to die, and that makes it a happy ending in some context. I wonder what it's like to be so unburdened by nuance. We should just kill all the murderers. I also hate hearing that it's the canon ending. There's not a fucking canon ending. The point of the multiple endings is individual experience. Just because his dad said he never saw him again after he went to Silent Hill means very little. I don't see my dad anymore, and here I am, alive and well. Additionally, in the OG Silent Hill 2, there were a lot of references to the possibility that this is a loop that James is stuck in. Again, like a kind of purgatory. And I 100% believe that this ending, if the looping thing is true, would restart the loop. Because you don't move on, you in fact do the opposite of moving on. A fun add-on to this, if you gather all the weird photos in the remake, total the number of things in said photos, and then use that to find a letter in the sentence on each of the photos, it spells out, "You've been here for 2 decades," which may lend some merit to the loop theory, as well as suggest that the remake is technically a sequel, which I find really cool. In the Leave ending, James does through fighting his way out of a demonic hellscape what most people do through years of intensive therapy. Potato, potato, I suppose. He lets go of who he believed himself to be, except that he made this horrible mistake and that while there were reasons, it doesn't change what he did. Mary's real letter confirms something that James couldn't accept before he went through his trials. Mary had forgiven him before it ever happened. She knew what this beast of an illness was doing to him beyond how it raged in her body. She understood that watching someone you love waste away to nothing is nearly as damaging as wasting away yourself. She knew how he felt. She may have even knew what he'd do. She forgave him anyway. He stops denying what happened and forgives himself, because terrible circumstances can make people do terrible things. He finds catharsis in the struggle and the struggles of those he meets, and he moves on. And goes to prison, maybe. It wasn't about erasing guilt. It was about finding a way to live alongside it. A lot of us are in the other world right now, fighting monsters of our own creation. Most people I know spend a lot of time beating themselves up. It's evident in the media that we like and the jokes that we make. We've become a bit masochistic in this internet age of comparison where a short depicting someone who's living better than you is one opening of an app away. And companies are relishing in and encouraging a tendency toward this insecurity. In the same way our pattern and problem-seeking brains look for the worst in society, it looks for the worst in ourselves too, highlighting our failures and flaws with consistent reminders of what we were, instead of highlighting the strength it takes to be what we are now.
I know what you are. I know why I needed you. But it's all over now. I don't need you anymore.
Guilt can be ingrained, institutional almost. But guilt is also relational. So maybe the secret is to communicate your remorse to those you've wronged while they're still around to hear your apology. But there isn't always someone to apologize to, or someone worth apologizing to. But a part of forgiving yourself is doing what you can to right what you feel you've wronged. That's what James's Silent Hill is, really. It's a way to atone, a trial to atone for the pain he caused and the guilt that he feels. An apology for not being there in sickness and in health. An apology for letting his selfish desires and pain push him to do something unspeakable. An apology for not being strong enough when it counted. We try. We fuck up. But we're all fuck-ups together. Don't kill your wife, though. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, please throw down a like and sub. It's the best way to support my channel on the way to monetization. Also, since YouTube is a turd about this watch hour shit, maybe throw my playlist on your PC and leave the room. What did you guys think of the remake? I know the cult of the original is pretty divided on the new one. I've actually never finished the original Silent Hill 2. I was a little too young when it came out, and by the time I actually got around to playing it, the fixed camera shit was just not serviceable for me. I wanted to play it for this video, but the process of getting it to run just looked like more than I cared about doing since the remake exists. But again, though, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any thoughts about the themes of the video too, please feel free to comment about that. I love to discuss what people thought. And don't you dare go hollow.